Over the course of 20 years, Ash has gotten a lot of Pokemon on his team, starting with Kanto all the way to Alola. As of this point in time, he has over 70, but discounting the other 29 Tauros he got in one episode, as well as temporary Pokemon like Raticate, Beedrill, Solgaleo, Larvitar, and Haunter, it's more like 48 total Pokemon Ash has had in his team. But instead of ranking all his Pokemon from least favorite to favorite, since there was a lot of ties doing that and this video would be incredibly long, I decided to list my favorite and least favorite Pokemon from each of his regional teams. That way, it's easier on me, and it also helps remove a lot of the ties I originally had when judging these Pokemon based on their chemistry, personality, and writing/development. I also merged his Kanto and Orange Islands teams into one because in the Orange Islands he only caught a Snorlax and Lapras, and he had most of his Kanto team in that saga to begin with, so it's not much of a major shakeup when compared to his later teams. I also didn't factor in their win-loss ratios like other videos on this topic have, because not only the picture they used to fill with a bunch of inaccuracies like the lack of Pokemon from Alola, certain Pokemon like Butterfree not being there, and inaccurate percentages like Goodra, but their win-loss record didn't really make said Pokemon all that memorable or interesting to me when compared to other criteria I mentioned earlier. I also won't be counting his Alolan team in this video since that arc is still going on, and for all we know, his current team could evolve or get better/worse since we have less than a year left before we move into Gen 8, and it would heavily date this video as well if I talked about them here. Finally, this is just my viewpoints on these Pokemon and are not facts, so if you disagree, let me know your favorites and least favorites in the comments below. So with all that said, let's begin with Kanto/Orange Islands. My favorite Kanto Pokemon from his team is Charizard. Now to be fair, this was a pretty close one between this and Ash's Bulbasaur for their development, chemistry, and definitely interesting personalities each one had, but I like Charizard's arc a little more. Starting off as a Charmander left in the rain to die until Ash came to its rescue, I like the story arc Charmander went down, starting from a Pokemon with abandonment issues as well as worries about it being abandoned again thanks to Damien's mistreatment of it for being weak, to a Pokemon that became like its trainer that abandoned him, obsessed with power and reputation, and finally ditched the traits of its past trainer when he saw that Ash was willing to risk his life again to save his life, despite Charizard/Charmeleon treating him like shit for a good chunk of his time prior to that point. It had good pacing, and a really good payoff by the end as it finally realized that it messed up and began to trust Ash again, ultimately becoming a better Pokemon by the end of that arc, as well as in terms of strength and personality. There's a reason why this character arc is slightly recycled for Chimchar and Tepig. It worked out pretty well back then, and it still works out pretty well today. Though Tepig's was the weakest admittedly because of its rushed pacing in that saga, and not really doing much of them development-wise, not chemistry-wise, after the episode where he fights the trainer that abandoned him. But outside of the chemistry with him and Ash, I also liked his chemistry with the other Pokemon on Ash's team like Pikachu and even the other members of Ash's group of friends. Hell, even after it started to obey Ash again, it still got development when the Charific Valley was introduced in Johto, and they showed he was outclassed when compared to other Charizards in the area, resulting in Ash releasing/letting him go for a bit to allow it to get stronger, but more importantly, better as a Pokemon, and that paid off in spades, as shown with his later appearances in Johto, and especially Unova, where we see a more mature Charizard when compared to his earlier appearances. So yeah, I like Charizard's arc. Its chemistry was handled really well, and the personality was also really great to see. Now for my least favorite Kanto Pokemon, and well, it's Kingler. While Ash's Primeape and Pidgeot have their issues in terms of chemistry and the like, I feel like they had more chemistry and writing/development than Ash's Kingler had. While I do like his personality at points, him being a mostly mellow and modest Pokemon, as well as having a good amount of determination as shown with his fight against Mandy, his development from a fiery and brash Krabby to what he is now is off-screen and is only implied that he changed since Ash caught it, and not really shown since we don't really see this old personality Krabby had that much, since, well, it's under Oak's ownership for most of the Kanto saga, save for the few moments it's used by Ash in Kanto/Orange Islands. That's probably Kingler's biggest crutch/weakness. A lot of its growth/development is told and not shown. And if you saw my video when I Choose You or even The Power of Us, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of this form of storytelling. If I saw this development from a fiery and brash Krabby to the mellow Kingler we see in present, maybe it would get more points/have a more positive look at it, but since that wasn't the case, all I can really judge it off of is what I see when it's on Ash's team, and it's not all that impressive outside of personality, and even that's hampered by its development and lack of screen time when compared to, say, Pidgeot or Butterfree. And in terms of chemistry, it's just, well, there. Not really feeling anything positive about it, like two friends celebrating a victory or having fun together. Still though, kind of a shame that it's like this, but with the 2 in personality and 1 in chemistry/writing, Kingler has the lowest amount of points I gave for Ash's team, making it my least favorite for the Kanto saga. My favorite Johto Saga Pokemon from Ash's team is Bayleaf. While not as great as Charizard or some of the others on this list, I still like Bayleaf for its chemistry and personality, especially its chemistry with Ash and Pikachu, which while it may come across as the stereotypical jealous girl, was still executed pretty well, making for some humorous moments with Pikachu, which was one of the main reasons I liked its chemistry. It's like two puppies fighting for the attention of their owner. Plus, I also like that as it evolved, it started to mellow out, which was great to see, and unlike Kingler, we saw this on screen and not implied it happened, showcasing some good development for the character, and was something I appreciated in a saga where I felt most of Ash's Pokemon were either okay or poor. Sure, I would have liked to see it evolve once again and maybe finish off her character arc of having a crush on Ash while also being jealous of other Pokemon Ash pays attention to slowly mellowing out with each evolution, to maybe ending that arc with her moving on from that crush as a Meganium, or have it be a smaller factor in comparison to her other strengths, like her physical strength or innovativeness, as shown in her Silver Conference performance against Houndoom and the like. But as it stands, with a 3 in personality/writing and a 4 in chemistry, I still liked Ash's Bayleaf, and in an arc with mediocre/poor Pokemon when it came to his new additions, that is saying a lot. And while on the topic of poor, let's talk about Totodile. Oh boy, this guy. First off, let me get the positives out of the way. As a comic relief character, it does a good job. It provided the laughs as a kid, and its cry is now stuck in my head because it had a bunch of good comedic bits with it. And that's really about it. As a character, which is what I'm judging the others on, it falls flat. It doesn't have a lot of chemistry with the other Pokemon on Ash's team, or even Ash itself. The closest one it got was with Ash's Corphish 2 sagas later, and even that's a stretch. And it doesn't really have a lot going for it in terms of development. And while I do like it as comic relief, when it comes down to writing for non-humorous bits, there's not really a lot there I can appreciate/remember. Again, I like him as a comic relief character. He's pretty funny and he gets some humorous bits, but as someone who likes those with a bit more depth to them, Totodile falls flat since, outside of him being comic relief, he comes across as just a flat Pokemon Ash has that can hit things really hard and not a friend/character that's with Ash on his journey. And that sucks because, well, I genuinely like the Totodile line in the games. It's not perfect, but I like it. But ultimately, I can't let my bias for Pokemon cloud the judgment nor the criteria I set up for myself for this video, and based on the criteria, with a 2 in personality and writing and a 1 in chemistry, Totodile is one of the weakest water starters on Ash's team. And speaking of water, let's move on to Hoenn. And my favorite from that is Sceptile. When it comes to Ash's Hoenn team, I also found his team to be one of the weakest overall in terms of personality, chemistry, and writing, but Sceptile was most certainly the cherry on top of that terrible sundae that was his Hoenn team. Starting off his journey as a cocky Trico, trying to protect his tree to eventually maturing and bonding with more of Ash's Pokemon, to even going through a rough spot after evolving into Sceptile, where he couldn't use his moves for a bit until he protected Ash and got over that rough spot. I really liked the journey Sceptile went on from the start of the Hoenn saga to the Battle Frontier saga, and it had a really good payoff with him finding a way to move forward from that heartbreak given in the episode where he evolves, and protecting his trainer while also being genuinely nice to his fellow friends, especially after evolving. He even still has the little twig from when he was a Trico. That's a cute touch. It's mainly the writing/development that does it for me, but he had a pretty calm and cool personality, making it easy for me to like him when he was on screen, and even his interactions with the other Pokemon like Corphish, while dickish at points, show that there was some good chemistry with the others, and even then, he'll do his best to defend them when in danger, which is an aspect I like, showing that there's a bit more complexity to him than other Pokemon on Ash's team during that saga outside of Pikachu. So yeah, despite my issues with Ash's Hoenn team being uninteresting for the most part, Sceptile was easily one of the highlights of that saga, bar none, with a great and likable personality, good chemistry with the other characters, and pretty good writing/development given him. Sceptile gets 4 points out of 5 for all 3 criteria, totaling up to 12. But since I talked about something I liked from Hoenn, it's time to talk about my least favorite Pokemon from Ash's team, and that's unfortunately Torkoal. Like I said in the Totodile entry, Torkoal is fine enough as comic relief as well as a battler, but since neither are criteria for judging my favorite and least favorites, I'm judging this Pokemon on what I stated in the beginning, and like Totodile, Torkoal falls flat in all of these departments. Hell, I almost forgot Ash even had this Pokemon. That's not a good sign since I can remember most of the other ones good and bad. On top of it being forgettable, I wasn't a fan of its chemistry with the other ones and Ash. If anything, it was just kind of flat or just there, especially with the other Pokemon on Ash's team. And even the interactions with Ash are also just there and not something that makes me smile, like his bonds with Charizard, Pikachu. His personality was also kind of there. Sure, he had some good moments, but like the chemistry was just kind of there, and it didn't really make me all that impressed. So yeah, I find him forgettable. His personality and chemistry aren't all that impressive, and while he does do some good things from time to time, it's ultimately not enough to redeem this Pokemon out of my eyes. What a shame. Fortunately, the next fire type Ash got was a lot better. Speaking of, yeah, Yeah, my favorite Sinnoh Pokemon is Infernape. Yeah, it's similar to Charizard's arc, starting off as an abused Pokemon and then having an issue with obeying Ash for a time, but to Infernape's defense, it's still executed well, and I liked his growth from a weak Pokemon abandoned by the soon-to-be ripped off Paul, to a Pokemon that manages to beat Paul's strongest Pokemon, Electivire, showcasing that strength is in everything, and that bonds and compassion also help, as shown with his great chemistry with Ash, as well as the other Pokemon on Ash's team, and even his friends. It felt like genuine compassion amongst the two, to the point where Ash and Infernape winning a battle together and have their hug/moment. It's really great to see, and a moment I love, as it showcases how far Infernape has come since Ash took him in, and that is something I appreciate in terms of writing as well as the chemistry. Even his personality was handled pretty well, slowly developing over the course of the series, and he had a pretty likable one by the end. Kind of mimicking Ash a bit in terms of personality, and as someone who likes Ash, that's also something I like. And his determination, even during the worst of times, but still going all out despite that, is a touch I like, because it showcases his never give up attitude. Yes, his character arc is similar to Charizard's in the end, but with a score of 4 across all 3 categories, totaling up to 12 once again, Infernape is my favorite Pokemon on Ash's Sinnoh team. Now for my least favorite. And it's a Pokemon that, simply put, came in too late and ultimately served little of an impact on Ash's overall team, Gible. I feel like this is 3 for 3 in terms of comic relief being my least favorite characters, but for Gible's case, this one feels the most, well, pointless to be added. Introduced in episode 156 and officially joining Ash's team in the following episode, at least 34 to 35 episodes to develop his character or do more with it, and let's take a look at what was left. Out of the remaining episodes, 13 amount to nothing. They hardly develop the characters further, a lot of them amount to nothing overall, and the remaining 21 episodes were used to either develop the characters or advance the plot to the end. These 13 episodes could have been done to develop the other characters, especially Gible, which is what I'm focusing on here, and they don't. That's not to say they are forced or required to make every episode important, but if you're going to introduce this character near the end of your run, maybe it might be a good idea to give him more to do outside of stuff related to comedy. Seriously though, most of Gible's appearances in them are for comic relief, and that's it. And for the record, an argument can be made, and I'm going to make it, that they already had comic relief in the form of Piplup. So why have another one? Especially when Ash already had 6 Pokemon at this point, and most of them were pretty good or decent as Pokemon/characters. Also, Piplup was doing the comic relief just fine. So to have a Gible that barely does much outside of one gag or biting stuff, doesn't get stronger ultimately, nor does he evolve and comes in near the final stretch of the series, that bugs me a lot, and that sucks because I like the Gible line in the games, like Totodile. So to see this one also reduced to comic relief, and ultimately worthless comic relief, since like I said earlier, they already had one in that saga and they already filled that role just fine, and a character with minimal personality or repetitive writing, and ultimately flat/uninteresting chemistry with Ash and the other Pokemon, coming off as an annoying child or stealing Turtwig's shtick of biting his head, which wasn't unique to the saga, let alone the series itself, mind you. Gible lands itself as one of the worst Sinnoh Pokemon Ash had in that run, maybe even one of the worst overall. Fortunately, Kalos showcased that Ash got better dragon types in terms of characters with Gudra and Noivern's character arc, but before we get into that, let's go through Unova first. My favorite from Ash's team is Krookodile. Some may argue my placement of this character, since a lot of people either find this guy overrated or didn't like him that much, but like Hoenn, Krookodile was the highlight for me in a really bad roster Ash had during said saga, and that's partially why he's my favorite. Starting off as a Sandile with stylish sunglasses and a caring side, to eventually a Krookodile who's still smart and compassionate, but has a bit of a reckless nature to him, it was a character arc I liked since it not only felt fresh in comparison to, say, them reusing the Charmander abuse story for the 3rd time, but also because it was executed pretty well, giving a character with a lot more depth to them in comparison to some of Ash's other Unova Pokemon. And yeah, it's not as deep as Charizard per se or Infernape, but it was still pretty good nonetheless. I liked it. I also liked its chemistry with Pikachu and Ash, as it followed them throughout Unova until the episode it was caught in, feeling like a recurring rival/antagonist for Pikachu to deal with, but also an ally at points, like its introduction episode where it tried to help save a group of wild Pokemon, or even the episode where it was caught where it helped Pikachu in a double battle. And the execution of the chemistry was also pretty good, feeling like genuine camaraderie/frenemies at that point, and his bond with Ash was pretty good to see on top of his likable/caring personality, since when I saw these two interact on screen, as well as with Pikachu, it felt like a legit good bond, or a legit good rivalry, like Infernape and Ash in terms of friendship. Basically, 2 friends or allies celebrating their victory or having fun together, and I liked it. So yeah, once again, 4 in all categories. Krookodile ties with the others at 12 points, and secures its spot as my favorite Unovan Pokemon. Speaking of points though, my least favorite for this saga had several ties. A lot of them had really flat or bland personalities, weak chemistry, or barely much writing/development. It really felt like a case of quantity over quality when judging these as characters, and while my choice for favorite came down to between Krookodile and Leavanny, albeit with a large gap in point differences, my least favorite came down to 5 choices. My least favorite Pokemon from Ash's Unovan team is Scraggy. He had over 100 episodes to make an impact / grow as a character after hatching, and barely did so. And that is worse to me than Pignite / Palpito, since he was in a lot of episodes, and was ultimately a disappointment by the time Ash sent his ass off to Oak's lab. Did he grow as a character outside of a couple episodes where he cares about his friends like Axu? No, and even then that's more chemistry, not writing. And even then, that's some of the only good chemistry he has with the other characters in the main cast, since he acts like an immature / headstrong brat outside of that, challenging Pokemon clearly stronger than him and getting his ass kicked. But okay, he is an immature child, maybe he'll grow out of that. Well, outside of an episode when he helps out Cottony and a small handful of moments, and most of which were with Axu, that's not really the case. He's still immature, still a brat, and still an idiot. But okay, maybe he evolves later, is what I'd like to say. But when Ash went around the Rainbow Islands, or whatever they're called, he decided to transfer Scraggy to the lab instead of potentially keeping him around and developing his character further. Like I said with Gibble, I am not saying the writer should have made every episode important, but given Scraggy's lack of development throughout his time in the Unova saga as a whole, it's still disappointing that this character wasn't really developed much, if at all, and since it was going to take a while for the Gen 6 anime to come out, so they had a bit of a chill period, they decided to send Scraggy to Oaks' lab instead of developing his character, or let alone other characters on Ash's team for that matter, further. Legit, I would have preferred an episode of Scraggy either moving past his immaturity or even evolving over, say, an episode where, oh gee, I don't know, Ash cares for a Caterpie, and Moga joining Team Rocket, or any episodes with Alexa in it. Besides, as shown by this image in the magazine, she uses stock art of the Pokemon instead of photos she took herself. My tangent aside, Scraggy's personality also bugs me. While I do like a never give up attitude, Scraggy's bratty behavior ruins that never give up attitude, and that behavior is not something I like seeing on screen, and while I do get the reason, doesn't mean I have to like it, and I don't here. Especially when they could have easily done something about it in the form of character arcs or development, neither of which Scraggy got. But from episode 17 to 123, Scraggy failed to impress me as a Pokemon, as a character, or even as an ally to Ash. Maybe if Ash didn't have a bunch of Pokemon in his party this time around, Scraggy could have been a better character, but since he wasn't, here we are. A bland, uninteresting character that disappointed me every step of the way, and I am not tolerating that at all. There's a reason why the term quality over quantity is still a thing, and for Ash's Unova team, that term should have been used from the get-go. And thankfully, it was for the next arc. So how about we stop stalling and get to my favorite, and yeah, it's Greninja. There's not really a lot I can add here that hasn't already been stated by several people in the community as well as those who've seen Kalos' saga. Greninja was one of the best. His chemistry with Ash coming up with some of the strongest in a long time, to the point of unlocking an anime-only form that makes him resemble his trainer, and even mastering it thanks to his bond with his trainer being strengthened as if they were one unit / really good friends, on top of him being really loyal. When they celebrate a victory, it feels like two friends achieving something together. When they fail, the show does a good job showcasing how much it affects them, i.e. the episode after Ash and Greninja lost Wolfric, and Greninja went after Ash, who ran off due to guilt because he was also guilty / felt responsible for losing. And while Ash also had good chemistry with his other Kalos Pokemon, I feel like he had the strongest chemistry with Greninja as well as the closest, especially in this particular episode, since Greninja was one of the only few Ash had that actually pursued him despite the cold. It actually reminded me of the bond Ash had with his Pikachu decades ago, and how close / tight-knit those two were together, and the same applies here. But outside of the great chemistry the two share, I also like Greninja's personality as well as the depth they put into it. Yes, he's stubborn and picky at points, but he's also really loyal to the people he cares about the most. He takes initiative to protect his friends and allies, as shown when he protected Serena and Chespin, and that was before its final evolution. Protects those who are weaker than him, like Bonnie when a Fletchling made her cry, and he fought said Fletchling. And he also appreciates bravery and selflessness, as shown in the beginning of the series when him, as a Froakie, took a hit for Pikachu when Team Rocket tried to attack it, and then helped them in combat afterwards, showcasing that he is brave and is willing to help people who at the time he barely knew of. And that's not even covering Ash-Greninja, as well as the development of that mini-arc going from them first learning about it, their attempts at perfecting it, and then finally mastering it by the end with a great payoff in the episode it happens in. Yes, he didn't beat Elaine's Charizard, but that doesn't negate the Ash-Greninja arc in the slightest, and if anything, it helped save the Kalos region when Lysander's Zygarde plan went into effect, which frankly is a bigger importance to me in the grand scheme of things in regards to that world than a yearly competition that lets people use Mega Evolutions and in a previous saga, Legendaries with no issue. Hell, Greninja is training with the 2 Zygarde cores to protect the Kalos region from future threats. That sounds like a much better ending to me than the status of that Pokemon who won a competition that one year. But my salt aside, I liked its personality, I liked its chemistry with Ash, and the writing/development that gave Greninja was really well done. Easily one of the highlights of Ash's Kalos team, and maybe even his team as a whole. With a 5 in personality, a 4 in chemistry, and a 5 in writing/development, Greninja ends this segment off with a 14 out of 15, the highest score I've given to my favorites in this video by far. So good job, Kalos anime. Despite your generation being disappointing, you had a great anime and a great starter Pokemon for Ash. But that also means picking a least favorite from this was hard, because I liked all of them to an extent. But in the end though, my least favorite is Noivern. Well, definitely a step up from the bland and interesting Unfezant, as well as Scraggy from the Unova saga, and Noivern does have a lot of strengths in terms of development, going from a crybaby to a badass selfless dragon who will protect his friends when in danger, and he had good chemistry with Ash as well as other Pokemon on his team, and even a good personality to an extent. His inclusion 76 episodes in did play a part in him not being as developed as other characters in terms of expanding their personality and etc. And while I do like Noivern's personality traits of him being more calm in comparison to when he was a child, his determination to never give up and also improve himself as a battler, his willingness to protect his friends and those he holds close and even sacrifice himself to save them at points, like when he took a hit from Gyarados to save Pikachu's ass, it's not as much as a Lucha or Talonflame. But again, that's largely due to it showing up later than them, and they certainly try to make Noivern a good character/Pokemon, and he's definitely way more interesting than Scraggy. He definitely showed development in his time on screen. But since that is the weakest element about him, and I do have to pick a least favorite, it's ultimately Noivern. Still though, certainly higher than the other least favorite Pokemon. But again, I need to pick a least favorite for Kalos because I did so with the others, and it's only fair. And unfortunately, Noivern just fell short. But he's still a great Pokemon regardless, and the Ash's Kalos team was easily one of my favorites in a long time. What are your favorite/least favorite Pokemon from Ash's team? Do you agree with my choices? Let me know in the comments below, and until we meet again, I'm David Grimm, and thanks for watching.